Hiya, it's Beyond the Box Art, the podcast where tweezers fly, parts vanish, and I once lost a propeller up my sleeve. True story. Benchmates, please welcome your hosts Paul Pendleton-Brown, Mike Baldwin, Tim Mulvihill, James Nevitt, and Paul Wong. And we are joined in this episode by Luke Slaney-Hewitt, Manager for Aircraft, Helicopters and Real Space at Revell.
Hello again, Brown here, and welcome to episode 3 of Beyond the Box Art, the podcast that smells like thinners, sounds like sarcasm, and sticks to your fingers when you least expect it. I'm joined today by Tim.
Hello everyone.
Mike. Hello everybody. Nevs.
Hi everyone.
And Wongy.
Hello.
Mark is off sunning himself in the USA on holiday, but before we get into the wonderful madness we've got lined up for you in this time round, can we just say, wow, we were blown away by the response to episode 1 and 2. Genuinely. The number of downloads worldwide has been absolutely staggering. It's humbling, thrilling, and frankly, a bit terrifying, but in the best way possible. So from all of us, thank you. An especially sincere thank you to everyone who reached out via our email, info@beyondtheboxart.com, or slid into our DMs on social media to point out that our audio balance on episode 1 may have been slightly enthusiastic, as in not quite set phasers to stun, but if you lost a filling or we woke the dog with our musical stabs, sorry, we heard you very loud and clear, and episode 2 hopefully was a vast improvement. Hopefully your speakers, hearing and dental work have now all fully recovered. Anywho, onwards and upwards. We have a fun-packed episode for you with some fantastic new stuff. First up, we're launching a brand new segment, Perfection in Plastic, our way to give a bit of the spotlight and a few minutes of mic time to sole traders and small businesses that keep this hobby buzzing. These are the folks hand-casting resin, creating niche decals, designing tools we never knew we needed until we did. If you love supporting the underdogs of modelling, this one's for you, but more on that later. Also launching another fresh feature called Bookmarked and Bewildered. You know the moment you're halfway through a build and suddenly think, hang on, should that aerial really be there? This hopefully is your one-stop shop to ask for assistance. Message us with your research conundrums. Paint colours, gear configurations, rivet patterns, you name it, we'll throw it open to your fellow benchmates. Someone out there has the manual, or a photo, or probably both. But hopefully we'll be able to point you in the right direction. And, as if that wasn't enough to glue your attention firmly in place, we've also got another Wongy's Wisdom with a continuation on water effects, and also is joined by our special guest, Luke Slaney-Hewitt, Product Manager for Aircraft, Helicopters and Real Space at Revell. Now, even if aircraft aren't quite your thing, and you prefer your subjects with tracks, sails or tentacles, misses, the process Luke will walk us through is absolutely fascinating and applies across the board. If you've ever wondered how a kit goes from vague idea to plastic reality, this is one episode you won't want to miss. Right then, brews ready, hobby knives clear of your laps, and fingers firmly off the ejector seat, let's crack on with the first part of the show.
Please support veterans, service personnel and blue light services through scale modelling therapy. Visit modelsforheroes.org.uk where plastic, paint and purpose come together.
Okay, Stash Inflation Report, what's new since we last talked to you on episode 2? Clearprop are back with a gem from the golden age. A brand new 148th Boeing F4B-4, that's the classic pre-World War II US Navy and Marine Corps biplane fighter. You'll have a choice of boxings, one in US Marine Corps markings, the other in US Navy livery. Expect superb detailing, as we've come to expect from Clearprop, plus rigging diagrams and period-correct schemes. Dogfighter models have thrown their leather flying clap into the ring with a new tool 1/72nd Messerschmitt Bf109 V1. That's the very first prototype of what would become the most produced fighter aircraft in history. A sharp choice for early Luftwaffe fans and those who like rare birds on the shelf. Edouard are keeping busy. First, they're back on the Mustang with the limited edition 172nd P-51D, Tales of Iwo Jima, dual combo kit. New decals, new parts, and all the Edouard finesse you expect. You get 2 kits in the box, showcasing different aircraft from the brutal Iwo Jima campaign. Also new from Edouard, the 148th Mitsubishi A6M2K0 Profi Pack, the 2-seat trainer version of Japan's iconic World War II fighter. Sprues include pre-painted photo etch, canopy masks, and multi-marking options. And if that's not enough, Edouard are bringing us a 148th BF110D, this time with fresh decals. The D version has a long tail for extended range operations, perfect for those Atlantic patrol dioramas. Hobby 2000 are offering us a fresh take on the 135th Academy AH-1Z Viper, this time in Czech Air Force markings, because nothing says Cobra with attitude like NATO rotorcraft in Euro camouflage. Italia are back with a reboxing of their 172nd Sukhoi Su-33 Flanker D, the Russian Navy carrier fighter. This time you'll have updated decals, including markings during operations aboard the Admiral Kuznetsov. Jetmads, those masters of large-scale boutique resin, are announcing 2 132nd scale Saab AJ37D and D1 Vigans. New parts, improved accuracy, and yes, those particular Swedish Sprinter camouflage decals are likely inbound. Magic Factory are dipping their toes into the Fleet Air Arm, with their first subject being a 148th Corsair Mark II. This is a repop which includes new parts specific to the Fleet Air Arm version, including bridge modifications and decals. Revell are keeping modern with a re-release of their 172nd F-35A Lightning II, now with markings for Switzerland, Norway and Australia. If you like 5th Gen stealth with global reach, this one's for you. RS models are back in the skies with a trio of 172nd re-releases. A Zlin Z-12, a lovely pre-war sport and training aircraft now with new detail parts. A Zlin Z-212, a post-war Czech light aircraft, also updated. And the Avia BA-122 Berlin, a vintage aerobatic biplane now with refined components. Sword are rearming their 172nd Grumman TF-9J Cougar. Originally released in 2015, the updated version includes Blue Angels and H&MS-13 US Marine Corps decal options. Verifier, more often seen in the ship world, have announced a bold move, a 135th Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver. And this is one to watch, as no other 135th Helldiver exists in plastic. Nor does much else in 135th, but that's the argument that goes on every episode. Over to Nevs with the nautical stuff.
Thanks, Brownies. So, Pit Road, the Japanese manufacturer, also known as Skywave, they are making a splash with 2 fine re-releases. First up, they've got the 1/700 scale Admiral Graf Spee, the 1937 variant. This is the infamous German pocket battleship. This will include photo-etched flags and a nameplate, plus any detailed updates. Also from Pit Road, the mighty 1/700th Ricolò. This is the pride of the Free French Navy, again with PE and display upgrades. Both kits will be packed with sharp detail for shipwrights working in the small scale.
Academy had taken the spotlight with a brand new tool, 1/35th K21 IFV. This is Korean's Army's frontline infantry fighting vehicle designed by Hanwha. You're looking at 4 new sprues, 4 to etch, flexible tracks, and an option for Armed Forces Day Parade markings, ideal for those who want the modern, less commonly modelled armour. Armada Hobby go wheeled with the 1/72nd Otokar Cobra, a fast and tactical Turkish armoured vehicle based loosely on the Humvee. It's compact, punchy, and very modern. Asuka model revisit the 1/24 scale American Bantam reconnaissance car, a Jeep prototype with new parts. If you like your armour tiny, old school, full of rivets, this is a little gem. Mini Art are reissuing the 1/35th Chevrolet G506 1.5 ton 4x4 repair truck. It's a classic scene setup with tool chests, ladders, and all the fiddly bits you'd expect from Mini Art. Ryfield model are loading the shelves. First, the 35th scale Tiger 1 early production, Kursk 1943. It's got upgraded version with new parts and details. Second, the 35th Panzer IV F2/G, the classic desert and Eastern Front action potential. The third is the King Tiger, the Henschel turret version, in full interior glory. Yep, engine, turret, basket, ammo, the lot. And finally, the 35th US M124 OA1, which is the MTAV, with the RPG net, a mine-resistant ambush protective vehicle tricked out for asymmetric warfare, urban warfare, and convoy modelers. This one's for you.
So now we know what we're spending our money on in the near future from the Stash Inflation Report. Let's see what everyone's working on and what they've bought since the last episode. So, starting on my screen at the top, Wongy.
So, on my bench, well, actually, off my bench, I finally finished the Wampa and the Star Wars Town figure that went with it. So that's gone, and that was part of our club's Coffee Coaster Challenge. So, unfortunately, I can't enter because I'm judging it. But to replace it, I have here one of Airfix's recent releases, which is the Shannon-class lifeboat. Basically, it's a British lifeboat, and it's looking rather dapper cutting through the ocean. So that's the only one I've got on there. I'm still working away on this catamaran, which is giving me nightmares at the minute. But I'll push through, and we'll see if I get that finished for our maritime theme later on at Telford.
If you want to make it an accurate diorama, you could always actually listen to your own advice from the last episode of how to do a waterscape.
Oh, I never listened to myself. Yeah, I should actually. Yes. I think I'll put it into some type of waterscape feature. More news to come on that one, and no doubt I'll post it up on the Facebook page later on. And
what have you spent your hard-earned pennies on since the last episode?
Just the El Cheapo Shannon-class lifeboat. And there are a couple of things which I can't name just yet because I've not actually told the wife. And she does listen to this show as well.
Busted. Okay, Tim.
Okay, well, I'm in a position where I've actually finished something. It's the 1907 Rolls-Royce from Airfix, which was a 1975 release. That's looking very good, and I'll have that ready when we six meet again. So I'm very happy. There's always something pleasurable about actually saying, yeah, that is done. The 148 Jaguar, the old version, I think it's late 80s, early 90s, all cammed up, beautifully done. I'm very pleased with it. And a new one for me, put all the dark grey on, and then decided to do the green freehand. No masking, just very, very careful with the light modulation, the fading. And yeah, it was one of those where you think, yeah, I'm very, very happy with that. As regards spending money, I have invested in a figure. So I never fall into a category with models. And it is one of the Airfix 1954. They're 54 millimeters, which I'm going to have a go at.
Nevs.
Yeah, thanks. So obviously I'm away from the workbench at the moment since I'm recording in Brussels, but Tim's to blame for all of that because obviously we've posting the 1815 Coldstream Guard. It made me expedite my need to come over to Belgium. But anyway, so on the workbench, it's still the Hasegawa 700th Kinugasa, the heavy cruiser. So the 3D printed full lower hull, that's all complete. It's been varnished and sanded down. It's had the primer. It's had the first coats. I've been using the live colour paints, which they were an absolute nightmare for me doing the Musashi, but for some reason they've worked absolutely beautifully with the Kinugasa. The linoleum brown is just coming out wonderfully. So that's going to take a long time because it's individual panels with the cruisers and the destroyers, as they had like the metal bar strip in between. So I'll be doing that. And in terms of what I've been spending my pocket money on, again, Tim's to blame. So I've been at Waterloo today. So I've been around Hougoumont, the farm where the Coldstream Guards fended off the French. The shop at Waterloo, it's very biased though. It's mostly French miniatures. So picked up a box of French Grenadiers to add to the stash.
Fantastic. And Mike?
Well, where do I start? I have gone through the shelf of doom, so I don't just have one model on the go, I have 14.
Gosh.
So I've decided to go through them. There's 4 armoured vehicles, so one's a Panther A, that's a TACOM full interior. I've got an Academy Panzer 4H, that's going to be done as the Normandy scheme. I've got an M88 German recovery vehicle from AFV. And I have got quite a few aircraft on the go. So, I've also got a 1/72 scale German E-boat with the 38 flak on it, which is quite impressive because it's about 14 inches long. What else have I got on? I have also got a Hong Kong Models B-25 Mitchell, which has had a few coats of paint on. And I've also started a ship, which is the 4-art 1/350th scale HMS Sheffield. Sublime kit. Is fiddly, but the way they've designed it modular, it's absolutely superb. And it's the first ship I know in 350th scale that actually has a bridge moulded into it. So there's little tiny glass windows that you can see into the bridge. So I'm possibly going to have to put figures in it.
That sounds like fun.
It does indeed, Brownie.
I've actually been looking at the new MRP Aqua.
Are they any good, Brownie?
They are absolutely fantastic. And I had an email exchange with the proprietor of the company this afternoon, and the new RAF World War II colours are being released on June the 20th. So the day after this pod drops, the new MRP Aqua acrylic paints will be available in the shops. The other thing that I've actually got my hands on is something which you're going to need to act on very quickly. And this is thanks to Dr. Strangebrush from Model Paint Solutions on the recent episode of the Model Geeks podcast. This is the Harder and Steenbeck 0.15mm needle and nozzles. They are discontinuing virtually all of the small nozzles for their airbrush ranges. So the 0.26 or 0.28, I think it is from memory, is going to be the smallest they're going to be produced. Yes, Mike?
Why would you get rid of all the smallest needles and nozzle sets? Your finest work's done at 0.15 or 0.18 or, 0.2 at a max. But any bigger, it's like they're going into automotive. I've tried to do fine detailing on a 0.4, 0.45, 0.5. Can't do it. You just get too much mist and you end up with overspray, and it's just... Yeah, I just don't get it.
Although they don't advertise it, the 0.15 actually fits in the Evolution 2024, which came out last year. So if you want the ideal scenario, get yourself a stock. So if you want them, go out and get them now. Otherwise, you may be out of luck.
Models Without Borders is proud to announce the launch of its first ever global online event, Virtual Model Exhibition 2025, or the shorthand version, VMX 25. VMX 25 invites scale modelers from around the world to showcase their work in a fully virtual format that reflects the hobby's growth and diversity. Entrants may enter models in any of the exhibition's 11 classes. Registration, which will cost $10, will be open from the 1st of August until the 15th, and each participant can enter up to 5 models. Builders can choose whether each model is evaluated, display only, or both. Evaluations will use MWB's skill-based system, which considers the modeler's goals, experience and craftsmanship. The system is designed to support growth, celebrate creativity, and recognise achievement across all skill levels, without comparison or competition. VMX25 winners will receive a unique gold, silver or bronze awards or a certificate of merit. VMX25 will take place after registrations are complete, and for updates please visit www.modelers, that's with 2 L's, modelers.org, and subscribe or follow Modelers Without Borders on social media.
Let's be honest. Scale modelling is nothing without the people behind the detail. The ones sanding resin in sheds, drawing decals between work shifts, or firing up the 3D printer before sunrise. All in pursuit of something better, sharper and more real than what comes in the box. And more often than not, it's not a big corporation making these things. It's not a boardroom. It's you, the one-person operation. The passionate creator. The shed-based sorcerer. The master of silicon and styrene. That's why we've launched Precision by Passion. It's a dedicated slot on Beyond the Box Art, designed to give independent makers and sole traders 10 to 15 minutes of totally free airtime to showcase what you do and why you do it, and how other modelers can support you. No sales pitch pressure, no jargon, just a conversation between benchmates. Or supply us with a pre-recorded piece without music that we can play out. If English is not your first language and worried about your accent, it's not a problem. You'll be amongst fellow modelling friends and we won't judge you, nor the audience. So don't let that put you off or use it as an excuse. So why are we doing this? Because without the aftermarket wizards, the scratch build masters, the decal dreamers, the specialist research publishers and resin renegades, modelling would be a lot more boring. It's your ideas, your craftsmanship and your obsession with the tiny details that elevate kits from off the shelf to museum worthy. But we also know how hard it is to get noticed. You've got day jobs, night jobs, families, and not much in the way of marketing departments. So this is our way of giving back and giving you the mic. So what's in it for you? Well, apart from a bit of fame and hopefully a few new fans, you'll get to share your story, why you started, what drives you, what sets your work apart. Talk about your products, from photo etch to pigment sets, cockpit upgrades to figure packs. Shout out your website, shop or social channels so our listeners can find and support you. And if you fancy, you can even drop a sneak peek of what's coming next. If you're worried about sounding awkward, don't. We're modelers too. We edit the ums and the ahs, or as many as we can. This is a relaxed chat, not Dragon's Den. So who's eligible? Anyone who's running their own hobby business. You don't need to be a household name, you just need passion, a product, and something cool to share with the community. Whether you're printing parts on your kitchen counter or packing decals from the garage, we want to hear from you. So how do you get involved? It's simple, just drop us a DM or PM depending which side of the Atlantic you're on. We're Beyond the Box Art on Facebook, or email us info@beyondtheboxart.com and put in the subject line Precision by Passion. Tell us who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there. And if you're not quite ready, no pressure, we'll be here when you are. This segment's not going anywhere because this community needs you as much as you need it. So if you're sitting there thinking, why would anyone want to hear from me? Trust us, they do. Because in a world of mass production, what stands out is precision. And precision comes from passion. We look forward to chatting to you soon.
Please visit modelpodcast.com because finding great modelling shows shouldn't be harder than masking a canopy. One website with all the best pods. It's time for Wongy's Wisdom, guaranteed to improve your models or at least make you feel better about them.
Hello, it's me again with some more Wongy's Wisdom. This time we'll be looking at how to create splashes and foam effects for the seascape in the last episode. So first you'll need to get some supplies, which I'll now list. Get yourself some Mod Podge matte glue, PVA glue, some cheap washing up detergent, Woodland Scenic Soft Snowflake, the code is SN140, a flexible scraper, the lid of a plastic box with a bit of flexibility in it. I use one from a really useful box. An old plastic mixing container. I use an old gravy cup from a chicken fast food place with 3 letters, K, F and C. A couple of small plastic bottles with screw tops and 2 plastic pipettes, or even better, 2 small plastic bottles with misting tops. Some cotton wool and kitchen roll, and finally some polyfiber. This is the material found in soft toy stuffing which my dog kindly donated to me. Okay, there's 3 steps to this. Step 1, prepping the wetting and fixing solutions. So we need to make 2 solutions in the plastic bottles, a wetting solution and a fixing solution. The wetting solution reduces the surface tension on your diorama so that the glue doesn't form blobs on the surface. The solution is a mixture of 10 parts water to 1 part washing up detergent, shaken in the bottle. The fixing solution, as the name suggests, is used to secure the water effects. It's basically a mixture of 3 parts water to 1 part Mod Podge with a couple of drops of detergent. Again, mix well in the other plastic bottle. Okay, here's the fun part. We're now going to create some pretty amazing water effects. I'll mainly talk about model ship seascapes, but it can apply to any model involving water. Step 2. How to create breaking waves and wakes. This is the easiest to produce, and we'll use a combination of the cotton wool and the polyfiber. Using the wetting solution, mist the area around, say, the bow area. Now using a brush, apply some neat Mod Podge in the area with small strips of cotton wool to the sides of the model. Brush the cotton wool in the direction of motion and fix it using a dropper with the fixing solution. At the bow of the model, again apply some neat Mod Podge and tease out some polyfiber. This will form the water splashes from the breaking waves, and it's where a bit of patience comes in. Now let the whole thing dry. Once dry, apply a misting of the wetting solution to break the surface tension. Then a mist of the fixing solution, soaking up any residue from the areas you don't want the effect using the kitchen roll. Take some of the snowflake material in your fingers and randomly sprinkle onto the damp fixing solution. Repeat this with a further application of fixing glue and snowflake. Now, set this aside and let it dry. When it's dry, just apply a mist of the fixing solution to secure everything in place. And that's it, done. This effect can also be used for the wake at the stern of the model. Depending on the scale of the kit, namely if it's larger than 1 in 700, you can try this next technique. Essentially, you want to create a foamy, frothy look. Here, using the same technique as before, we add a further stage. Using the mixing cup, put a small quantity of neat Mod Podge and slowly add the snowflake material. Use a coffee stirrer stick to blend it all together until you have clumps the size of breadcrumbs, around 2 or 3 millimeters. Apply the wetting solution and fixing solution and randomly sprinkle this mixture around the wake area, namely the sides and the locations where the props would be. Let it dry and repeat the final fixing task. It all sounds complicated, but it's not. If you repeat the mantra, wet fix, apply fibre, final fix, dry. Wet fix, snow material, dry, final fix, dry. That's it. Not complex at all. Step 3. How to replicate splashing waves or runoff from the decks. So we need to prepare some water splashes using PVA petals. To do this, get the flexible plastic lid and using PVA and a sizable brush, about 1 inch wide, apply a blob of glue to the lid and slightly brush it out and lift off. We're aiming for a PVA petal about 2 inches long that thins out towards the lift-off point. You may need to practice this a bit. Make a number of these PVA petals, then get some teased cotton wool and lay it into the PVA and let it soak in. Now, put the whole lid onto a sunny windowsill and let it dry out. You don't get many of these days in Manchester, let me tell you. Okay, when everything is dry, take the scraper and gently remove the petals. Do this from the thick end of the PVA by lifting the edge up and gently sliding the scraper through. Well done, that's the hard bit. Now, you can take these PVA petals, trim them and shape them to suit your model and glue them in place with a bit of Mod Podge. It's up to you where you apply it, but it will certainly look great on your seascapes. Also, be it in a car splashing through a puddle, the runoff from a ship's deck, or the splashing of a bomb from the Dam Busters raid, it's really down to your imagination. So, there you go. There's my tips on water effects. I'll upload the usual details and some pictures onto our socials and website. Go and give it a try. Have some fun, and I'll see you on the next Wongy's Wisdom. Ta-ra!
Okay, our guest on this episode is one of those lucky people who turned a love of models into a full-blown career, and he hasn't looked back since. He kicked things off at Airfix, diving into research for some seriously iconic kits like the recent 124 Spitfire and 148 Sea King, Jaguar and Gannet. If you've built one, you've probably marvelled at a piece of Luke's work in your hands. These days, he's the brains behind the aircraft, helicopters and real space releases at Revell, where he juggles everything from dreaming up new kit ideas to wrangling suppliers, fine-tuning decals, box art and making sure the CAD looks spot on. He doesn't get to do as much research as he used to, but don't worry, he still loves getting stuck into the detail where he can. Armed with a product design degree from Bournemouth University and a background in construction design, Luke brings both clear creativity and structure to the bench. Basically, if it's in the air or came from space, Luke's probably had a hand in it landing on your sprue. Please put your hands together to welcome from Revell, Luke Slaney-Hewitt.
Welcome.
Hello there.
Okay then, so how do you decide which aircraft, helicopters or space subjects make it into Revell's development roadmap?
Yes, so it can be quite varied. Obviously, we'll deal mainly with aircraft with this one, but obviously we look for gaps in the market. That's the first place. So you see what competitors are doing and you try and identify those gaps. It can be easier said than done. There are gaps for a reason in some cases. There's a Lincoln that's missing from most ranges, and that's because sales might not be as good as some people would lead you to believe. But it's sort of younger sibling, the Lancaster, obviously there's loads of those. So a gap in the market, but it doesn't always have to be a gap, which I'm contradicting myself on the first answer. But, so there are subjects that you can do time and time again. Not another Spitfire comes to mind, but everyone has Spitfires in their stable for a reason. They make money. There are products that can overlap, and, you're never going to get away with doing something unique every time. You can put your spin on it. You can obviously look for, yes, a Spitfire might have been done, but has this certain mark been done? In the case of a Spitfire, almost certainly yes, but other aircraft, not so much. So once you've sort of found the gap, you obviously have to look at your company and what are we known for? So at Revell, we have a very varied approach. We're not going to do 1/24th aircraft, for example. When we're thinking scales, we mainly operate in 32nd and 72nd. 48th is a rarity for us, which is something that might surprise people. But if you look back at our development history in the last sort of 20 years, there's not been a whole lot coming through unless it's a bigger aircraft. So 32nd and 72nd is where we primarily operate, and obviously 144. So you essentially filter down these gaps. But also, how do we decide on what subject we're going to do? Quite often it would just be something we come across. We're all really involved in the modelling world, obviously. I'm going to shows and things like that. I get suggestions sent to me on a daily basis. And so you soon pick up where there are any gaps in the market. I think at Bolton, I was told we should bring back our 32nd F-14. We get suggested new tools all the time. I'm getting thumbs up from the audience. Through feedback, we get a lot of ideas. There are times where we want to break the mold entirely. So what can we do that's different to what most people will be expecting us to do? Generally, you can't break the mold all the time. You're looking for something that's not been done, or if it has been done, how long ago, and are there any obvious problems with it? So, for example, Meteor, I know, Paul, we've been speaking about that throughout the research process, but, there's obviously a 32nd Meteor out there, and that's the Hong Kong models one, but we're looking at a different beast altogether, obviously a different mark, as I was sort of saying, the Hong Kong being an F4 and ours being an F8, FR9, but also in terms of detail, we've sort of stepped it up massively, and that's, not because the Hong Kong models is inferior in any way. It's designed with a certain sort of part count in mind, whereas we've gone somewhere else. We've gone sort of ultra detailed with 400 plus parts rather than 100 in the HK models. So, as I say, you can overlap. You do have to look, how big is that market? So a 32nd Meteor, not everyone's going to be able to do one. So we might do an F8. Someone can't then bring out a T7. Someone do a night fighter. There's just not enough room in the market. Unlike Spitfires, Lancasters, your bread and butter subjects. So really, that's all it is, gaps in the market and sometimes just a bit of gut feeling. But obviously, the gut feeling then has to be backed up with lots of market research and numbers that are presented to the team. And we sort of decide, not just myself, but all the other product managers, so people responsible for the tanks, the cars, all the other stuff we do. We have a set budget within the team. And so we sort of have to identify which of these products we're suggesting have the most sales opportunities. I hate talking the money, it's grubby, but ultimately we're a business. So if there's a subject that, yes, it complements our range, that's great. But if there's a subject out there that's going to make us more money, we'll do that one, which sounds very obvious. But, if you had the choice between doing the Supermarine Walrus or the new F-35, you're going to do the F-35, despite it not being as unique, which I know people will be saying, oh, why not? Why don't you do the subject that I've always wanted? Me and my two mates would buy it. Well, that's the problem. We might get free sales out of it rather than the 10,000 we get elsewhere. So those are the sort of decisions we're making when it comes to picking stuff. And we're trying to work sort of 2 to 3 years ahead. Any more than that, and you are in the wind is what I want to say. But I was looking for something a bit politer, because the market changes so much over those years. So if I make a decision now, because of the timelines involved with bringing a new product to market, I'm going to have to reevaluate in 2-3 years' time. I can't be picking stuff 5 years ahead because it's such a competitive marketplace nowadays. Edward, Airfix, Academy, any of our competitors could bring out something that scuppers a plan. So you don't want to put your eggs in your basket that far ahead of time. So 2 to 3 years is about where we're working. And that's sort of how we're picking the ideas.
You've raised on a few points which we'll be covering further down the interview, but what are the key differences in approach when developing kits for historic aircraft versus modern jets or spacecraft?
Differences in approach? Well, really it comes down to research and licensing. When it comes to developing kits for historic aircraft, you're relying on archive material massively to get the shape right, and you don't have people that worked with the aircraft. Generally speaking, if we're talking sort of Second World War, you're not going to be able to rely on any first-hand accounts of mechanics that work on it. Whereas if you're working on a Tornado or something like that, you can obviously find aircrew that have been involved with them throughout their service lives that can point out things that you might miss otherwise. That's one of the key differences. So you're sort of relying on secondary research most of the time with historic aircraft. The only time you sort of do any primary research is that you go and scan the aircraft potentially to get the shape data. Because we as a country in the UK are terrible at archiving blueprints for historic aircraft compared to the States. If you go to the Smithsonian and say, can I have a set of drawings for the B-24? They go, yeah, do you want the Ford set, the consolidated set, or the North American set? It's fantastic out there, but unfortunately, because obviously the British aerospace sector is basically a set of mergers over the decades, and every time a company merges, material is lost. There's no central archive where you can say, right, I want a Spitfire Mark 9 set of drawings, I want insert plane name here. You just won't be able to find them. Spitfires, there's more drawings out there than others, but most stuff you won't be able to find it. So you have to rely on scans, you have to rely on obviously period images, which aren't as clear as you'd always want them to be, and you have to rely on experts. And that's where the IPMS, Brick Modeler, the community that we have is great because it brings all this expertise together, and we do lean on them very heavily. So we're always very thankful for those people that help. When it comes to modern jets though, or spacecraft, modern jets, let's focus on for now. You are F-35. We've just brought out a new model. And you quite often won't be able to get the CAD data. Something about, top secret, don't want to give away their stealth data and all that. Who knows? What they didn't want to give me all the CAD data from Lockheed Martin. Selfish, really. But so you have to rely on sort of images, any data that's out there on the internet that's publicly available. Same with spacecraft. SLS is a prime example. There are data sheets out there, but all the measurements are quite rough. So that's where you really have to lean on your instincts as a designer. I'm not a designer, but obviously as a CAD designer, you get an eye for things. And it seems weird to be saying, but in this modern era, we're more reliant on the designer's eye because so much is secret, so much is not given out. If you compare modern jets to supercars, if you approach Lamborghini, say, we will do a new version of your Urus or your Huracan, whatever it may be, they'll give you CAD quite often that has every nut, bolt and rivet. And you quite often have to say, no, that's too much. Our machines aren't capable of opening them. But it's not the same for an aircraft because of the sensitivity of that data, especially with warfighting jets, fighters, etc. It's strange to say, but actually for historic aircraft, although you don't have that primary source being able to talk to people that worked on them, you do have the ability to go and touch them, measure them, scan them, and there's so much material out there. It's sometimes easier to do one of those than it is to do a modern jet, which seems strange to be saying, but yeah, that seems to be how it is.
I take it that's why the original 132nd Gripen, which was based on a prototype, was, I'll say, a little lacking in some of the dimensional quantities for the aircraft. Now the aircraft obviously were long established into service and a lot more potential sales on the horizon. Is that one of the subjects that you would think about giving it a bit of a repop?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Gripen. 32nd is always a challenge just because of the amount of investment needed. So, for every 32nd Gripen we're not doing a 32nd Spitfire. I come back to that. We've obviously done 32nd Spitfires, but you always have to value, weigh up what's going to make the company more money.
Yep.
Which sometimes, put my enthusiast hat on, doesn't mean it's the most interesting model for me or for those that are really into model building, because Revell is sort of positioned in the middle of the market, or we're targeted at the enthusiast, but we're also targeted at younger kids. We're more diversified as a brand with sort of more toy interests as well, so we always have to balance our subject choices accordingly. So obviously 32nd is generally more of an enthusiast level product, and with Gripen specifically, you'd be able to get more access now than we would have back when the 32nd was originally designed. That being said, would we get access to the E and F marks that are now coming onto the market? I'm not sure, because again, they'll be sort of cloaked in secrecy, maybe not as much as an F-35, but it's about getting the right people to say yes, which can be harder or easier said than done, I should say. If you get the licensing team from Saab on side, then you might be able to, but you need the right people. Would we do a Gripen? I love the Gripen. It's fantastic, but I'm not sure that it's popular enough, because if you think about our markets, our biggest ones are UK, Germany, the US. Gripen doesn't operate in any of those countries. Obviously, there's an awareness of the type in those countries, but generally, for good sales, you want the Air Force of that country to be operating it, or at least it to be more popular, if that makes more sense.
That makes perfect sense, but as the fact you've already toured the 132nd Gripen previously, it would hopefully be an easy upgrade rather than actually having to start from scratch. So in the same way that you've actually brought the Hunter up to date with a new release coming out, which obviously you're going to talk about later, it'll be a mold tweak rather than a new investment from scratch. But yeah, I take your point on board perfectly. Okay, how does modelling real space relate to what you're actually doing with modelling aircraft? Because obviously you're not going to get much access to the clean rooms that you go and measure a satellite or a part of a spacecraft.
No, exactly. And so the SLS that we're doing is a good example of how we approach these. If you go on the NASA website, you'll find fact sheets so there's an overview guide of the SLS, and then there are individual sections that are detailed. So your SRBs, your engine sections, your core stage, etc. And they'll give you measurements. And through a bit of detective work, you can start to basically build out a picture of the dimensions. But obviously, there's not a whole load of NASA SLS rockets sitting around that you can go and take photos of. They sit on the launch pad for a while and then they're gone. Sort of a single-use thing. So, and unfortunately, I've not been able to get over. I've not convinced them to send me to Cape Kennedy or wherever it launches from. Apparently, something about expenses being too much. But
I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep trying. But you do have to rely on this sort of marketing data that NASA put out, full well knowing that it's not going to be the most accurate. That being said, you are working within the scale. A rocket is 1/44th scale. So if NASA say the the diameter of the sort of main core stage is 8.4 meters, if it's actually 8.42, the difference is, it doesn't matter so much. And that's coming from someone who works with 0.01 of a mil most of the time. It's fine. That being said, the guides do seem to contradict each other. So this is where you really have to do your research and start looking at multiple sources. And then you soon find out things like the SRBs, the dimensions given in the reference guide, are wrong, because you can go and measure these SRBs because they're reused from the space shuttle. And there's plenty of those that you can measure or get dimensions for. So it's not ideal with the SLS. And this applies to all of real space, that you can't run your tape up it because, my tapes are 5 meter and 10 meter. And unfortunately, the SLS is 100 odd meters tall. So, you're not going to get anywhere near to them. And that's where I say, the designer's eye comes in really useful. I'm forever on Flickr because there's really high quality images of the rockets on there. And, you are comparing CAD to imagery, which is a difficult thing to do because, parallax error and things like that, you can't rely on them. But you can get an idea of where proportions might be needed to be altered, etc. When it comes to things like SpaceX, obviously it's something we've sort of got on our mind. They are a commercial company, so a bit like I was saying with supercars, they may very well provide you the CAD if you ask very nicely, if you can get a license with them. NASA, because they're in the public domain, they're a government agency essentially, but the SLS is designed by contractors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, etc., and it becomes very, very difficult to get any information because, again, a bit like the F-35, they want to keep it secret. It's their IP. So why would they give it out to a model kit company?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I believe virtually all the plans for the space shuttle are actually available now on the NASA website. So with the 172nd monogram offering being a little bit dated and challenging, shall we say, in some areas of scale, with that information available, possibility Revell may look at doing a shuttle in the future?
There's always the possibility, there's a whole lot of kits that, again, sort of going back to the first question, where no one's looked at them because there are offerings, but the offerings from model kit companies date from the 70s or 80s. Concorde hasn't been tooled in a very long time. Space Shuttle, as you say, all this information is now more publicly available. I can go 3D scan various things, and I could improve them. Touching on the point about the Gripen from earlier, it's a lot easier to retool something entirely than it is to touch something up, which is something I don't think most people appreciate. With the Gripen, that's going to be pre-CAD, or if it was CAD, it's very early days. And so to go back into the tooling and change it, there's no... We use CAM now, so computer-aided manufacture. So the CNC machines, they'll obviously run off data, but we've got no data to input. So changing that tool is nigh on impossible. With the Hunter, it's sort of an example of that. We don't have any CAD, although it was designed on CAD. Unfortunately, in 1997, and the CD that it was on has gone missing. It was in the archive. And, there's plenty of examples of that where CAD just over the years has sort of disappeared. I challenge anyone to go and find everything they had in 1997 in their loft, because stuff will have gone missing. I wasn't even around. Sorry to age anyone, but
we've gone right off you already.
You've just aged me. Yeah, you'll find it's on a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk.
More than likely.
Well, I'm sorry to age you, but with the Hunter, as I was saying, like the CAD's gone, so you have to 3D scan the actual plastic and then reverse engineer. That's easy to do because you're tooling new parts to go on top of the existing. But with the Gripen, say, I don't know what the actual dimensional problems are. It's probably all over the place if you actually compare it to a 3D scan. New wings, new fuselage. At that point, you may as well retool it all because we just don't have the data, unfortunately. So, they're sort of stuck as they are, those molds from before 2000, I would say.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And I'm just looking at Mike actually holding his 132nd Gripen that he's actually trying to bring up to a reasonable standard. So what you're saying is you are bringing out a new 132nd dome pin and we've got an exclusive. Joking, don't panic. Okay, I'll hand the baton over to Mike.
How closely does Revell work with aircraft manufacturers, aerospace agencies, museums, or subject matter experts to ensure accuracy and access to data?
Yeah, so I sort of touched on this over the previous few questions, but we work very closely where we can. We'll deal with that sort of each part of that question as different stages. So how closely do we work with aircraft manufacturers? Very closely if we can get any data off them. So when it comes to civil airlines, quite often Airbus, Boeing, they'll give you data, but it won't be the full CAD package. What you'll get is a licensing model. And this is the case with some other manufacturers as well for military stuff. It just depends what they've got available to them as a licensing sort of branch of the aircraft manufacturer. So if we're doing an airliner, we'll get given a simplified version of the CAD, which is great, but it does quite often mean that you have to do a lot more investigating, because for that model, it's not designed for model kit companies. It's designed for people that just want something that looks like a A321 or whatever it is. They're not so bothered about. They're not rivet counters. Let's put it like that,
Yeah.
And my job is to be a rivet counter professionally. I then have to go to museums, or in the case of airliners, it can be more tricky because Heathrow seem to be a bit funny about just random men walking around the ramp.
Taking photos.
Yeah, they get a bit concerned. So you either have to arrange to go visit one in the factory, which I'm always happy to do. It's a good day out. Or, go to things like Paris Air Show or Farnborough, where you can get up and close and, get a nice fancy badge saying Airbus or Boeing. So when it's available, we'll get a license model, but quite often that's not the case. But you have to work closely with the manufacturers from a licensing perspective, because they want to give the rubber stamp to say, yes, we approve this is a licensed product. There are some companies, they will charge different percentages. I won't tell you who charges the most, but there are some that, just want approval so they can manage their brand image and don't charge us a royalty fee. And for them, I am eternally grateful. But some of them are more expensive than others and don't give you a whole lot. Moving on to aerospace agencies, we don't do a whole lot of work with sort of anyone apart from aircraft manufacturers. What's more relevant there is probably airlines. We work quite closely with them. Obviously, Revell has a huge civil airliner back catalogue. We might have the model, a 737, for example, one of the most common airliners out there. We can rebox that 200 different times and never repeat the same livery. But you have to get permission from the airline and you have to work very closely with them. Again, they'll charge a licensing fee. Some will want more input than others. Some are just very happy to see a model of their livery on there. One of the most recent liveries we've done was Condor, which is a German airline. And if you've seen the recent repaint on their A321s, they are sort of candy striped with yellow, green, or all sorts of colours, red as well, I think, striped all the way down the aircraft. And you notice them at the airport. So we work very closely with airlines, and aircraft manufacturers, aerospace agencies, not so much. Museums, so this sort of, again, links back to our first question. And this is when we're dealing with historic aircraft, generally. Museums we work very closely with, and through my work with Revell and previously at Airfix, have a very big contact list of different people at museums that can get me in for a fee most of the time to go look at their very nice aircraft. We can obviously, the RAF Museum and IWM are the sort of two biggest in the country, and we can get in there pretty easily to scan, to photograph, measure, whatever it may be. And they're really crucial in delivering a quality product. I think for Meteor, we visited Jet Age Museum as our main one, and the guys over at Elvington, particularly Graham, has been very, very helpful. And this goes back to having, generally with historic aircraft, you won't have a crew member that's worked on it, but you might have someone that's restoring one at a museum, and that can be worth its weight in gold. So Graham at Elvington, is able to open the canopy, take off cowling, panels, everything, all for the good of the model, to make it as accurate as possible. And we really rely on people like that are passionate about the subject matter. So that sort of ties into the subject matter question as well. generally you go to the museums not just for the aircraft, but also to find the people that have the knowledge, because they're not just going to come and find you. Sometimes they do, which is great. So at the end of all our blogs, we quite often put a contact email address to say, if you've got any input, send it this way, which is good. I think, Paul, you might have written into that one before, and I had a few other people as well. So you can find people, but quite often the best place to do that is a museum. And as I say, they really bring the project to life. So we're always grateful for those people that help, because otherwise it would just be me walking around museums for life, not knowing about certain panels.
Okay, so does that mean you've actually scanned the same Meteor twice for two different manufacturers? In two different scales, and maybe a certain WH364, which I used to own.
Yes, yeah, I couldn't believe that when you told me. I didn't scan the one for Airfix. That actually predates my time at the company. But yes, Airfix did scan that aircraft, and then Revell also scanned that aircraft. So it's a very, very famous one within the model industry now. I'm trying to think where else we went for F8s. FR9, we went to Newark as well. That's another one I should mention. Obviously, it's within the same sort of boxing, but the FR9 at Newark is obviously a trials aircraft before anyone comments to say watch out for that. For how long did you own the aircraft, Paul?
It was probably the best part of 6 or 7 years when it was still on the main gate at RAF Kemble. My late father and I actually bought it from the MOD. And we stored it on the airfield for a number of years before it was acquired by the Jet Age Museum. The original plan was it was going to be part of Meteor Flight. We looked at swapping out the centre section for the T7 for a while, which became the Flyer WA591, which is still flying in the States. So it was a possibility, but it made more sense to go with the T-Bird than it was with the F8 to get it flying, because obviously only one person could fly the F8. And Winston at that time was operational in the UK, so that's why we didn't actually continue down that line. But we at Meteor Flight, we believe in the end, the world's largest spares hoarding for Meteors, including a brand new rear fuselage, outer wings, you name it, all still boxed, brand new, unused, as well as all the internal components. Hence why I have all the manuals, and why you and I have been messaging, looking at the drawings for the 8.
As I say, it's people like yourself and museum volunteers that you really just wouldn't imagine that information was out there, or people coming out of the woodwork with that sort of information that can really change a project. It quite often, sod's law, people will come out of the woodwork after the project's finalised, and they'll point out something you've got wrong as well. But it's a two-way.
At least I was ahead of the queue on that one. At least before it's being released.
Yeah, as I say, I'm very grateful for that. I didn't want you pointing out anything afterwards.
Yes. Speaking of which, just watch out for the antennas on top of the wings of the F8. You'll see what I mean when you actually see the mouldings. Anyway, moving on swiftly. Next question, Mike.
What's the typical timeline from concept to release for a new aircraft or helicopter kit? And what's the most time-consuming part?
I'll deal with the latter part first. It's tooling. Tooling is the bit that consumes all the time. It can move quickly, but the quicker you move the tool shop in China, the more likely there are to be mistakes. And then the more time you spend doing test shots to correct those mistakes. So it's striking a balance of, yes, keeping pressure on the tool shop, but also making sure they're aware, don't send us anything if it's not ready. Because they will. If you say, I need it by the 1st of June, then they'll send it. But you might end up doing an extra 2 rounds of test shots, which takes up 3 weeks each time you do a round of test shots at least. It's balancing that. But generally, tooling will take, I'm thinking Meteor now, 6 to 12 months is my estimate on that. So that's obviously, there's a big range there. It depends on the project, obviously. The bigger the project, the longer it should take, because the more tools there are. So the more parts, the more things that can go wrong. A small project, 70-second Spitfires, 109s, they should be quicker. But obviously, if you get your first shots and there's a huge problem, they've scaled the CAD incorrectly, or God forbid, then you're going to be spending a lot of time. But generally speaking, it moves a lot quicker, 6 to 12 months. Typical timeline from concept to release of a new aircraft is generally about 2 years, I would say. And you're still moving quite fast to do that. I have to have the idea, then present it to the management team, get sign off on the project as a whole. find the relevant supplier for CAD data. So whether that be the actual tool shop in China, whether that be a freelancer in the UK or Europe, make sure that they're okay for time, because sometimes you have to wait for them. They'll be on another job and you want a specific person to do the job. And then it's straight into tooling. Design, I think Meteor was 5 months, which was going great guns to make that happen, really. Typically, that would probably be about 7 months of design.
Is that with just one designer, Luke, or do you have a team?
Just one designer. I think trying to coordinate that project amongst multiple people would just be too complex, really. Speak to any designer if they've ever had to take over someone's job halfway through, and they'd say they'd rather just start again generally, because it's so individual, the style in which people design. Obviously, if we had a whole internal team, we'd have a set of design guidelines and it should make it easier to people to sort of chop and change. But we work generally with freelancers. It's then my job to sort of try and level out the quality and also just try and bring some consistency, because you've got 5 different people working slightly differently. It's just bound to happen. Generally, just one person on a kit.
Just as a follow-up on that one, do you tend to have your designer working on just one product per year, or do they work on, say, 2 or 3 projects?
They'll probably just one project at a single time. They might do multiple in the year, just depending on the size of the projects. Obviously, if they're a freelancer, they might have another job for a different company, and then you'll try and basically book in their time for after that. But yeah, if say the designer was just working for us, then they work on multiple projects, but I'd only ever do it in sort of a linear style, because it just becomes too complicated to be, I'm designing the wings of a Meteor one day, the rotors of a Lynx the next. You get very muddled. You'd end up with a hybrid of multiple different types. I think you'd have a Gloster Meteor Lynx or something like that in the end tooling.
Something like a Revell today.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Just because of the size and the complexities of these projects, you try and keep it very linear for them, for their sake, and also for mine. Trying to manage multiple projects at one time, it can be a bit complicated. So going back to the timeline, yeah, I think generally 4 to 6, 7 months is a design for a new aircraft kit, depending on scale, size, etc. Tooling, as I say, 6 to 12 months. It can take quite a bit of time to get the concept approved sometimes. So you're trying to work as far ahead as possible, just to make sure that all the umming and ahhing at the start doesn't cost you at the end. And, you're always trying to be as quick as possible without compromising on quality. With Revell, previously, I think in the last 10 years, definitely within the last 5, we've averaged 1 aircraft release a year. This year, 2025, we have the F-35s hit the market. We'll have the Meteor, the SLS, and hopefully the Hunter. We've really started to ramp it up. And so, I only joined Revell in April of last year. Most of those projects were very early days, if they've been started at all. You can see that 2 years isn't always the case. You can speed things along, but for an easy life, I prefer it to be 2 years. And it can be a lot more relaxed and ordered, shall we say.
Okay, so on that theme then, Luke, after you joined the company, obviously the plan for the original Meteor Mark III was on the drawing board for the 132nd tooling. How come it changed to the Mark 8?
The Mark III had been announced November 22, I think. And in all honesty, not much had been done on the project for reasons I'm not entirely sure on. It meant that it was ripe for a change because, we weren't 3 months into a design and therefore throwing away a lot of work and money. Nothing had been done. And it was a case of, I always felt that the F8 FR9 was a stronger choice. It has more marking options. It's more interesting, despite it not being obviously wartime. That's the only thing the F3 has in its sort of favour, that you get one camo scheme, I think. But you're also stepping on the toes of HK models, again, who have an F4. I'm guessing if we had done an F3, we'd have found a way to do an F4 and maybe a T7. That's sort of the progression. But why? Why go somewhere where there's already a model that's relatively modern? For a sort of niche aircraft, also we all know a Meteor or a meat box, there's not a massive market for them out there, so why not transition to the F8 FR9, where you have loads of markings for the RAF, but you've also got countless European schemes, the Australians, which is a big distributor for us, and then also Latin America, South America. There's quite a few operators down there with some really cool schemes, so it seemed a bit of a no-brainer to alter it. And as I say, helped by the fact that not much had been done on the original project. So it was a pretty easy change to make, and we could get the ball rolling pretty quickly. Again, one of the things that helps us was that there's a lot of airframes within the UK that we can visit and measure. Historic aircraft like that, I wouldn't be as confident to change the version if there wasn't the research material around, but luckily there was. A good few days of meteor hunting was to be had, and then find a designer who could do it as quickly as possible.
Luke, how much gold bullion do we have to give Revell to produce a 30-second FGR2 Phantom?
A lot.
I'll take the bribe. You don't have to give it to Revell. You can give it to me.
Considering we was on about it previously regarding the new F4B Phantom in 30-second scale, that is an eye-watering €340 for an F4B, the 30-second FGR1 and FGR2 have never been done, and it's a shame, really. And it's a good British aircraft.
I did an interview at Telford with Gary of Gary's Stuff, and he said, what's your dream kit? I said, it's not a kit, it's a series of kits, really, and it's all 30-second scale post-war jets, RAF jets, really. Who knows? Is all I can say. Who knows what the next 5-10 brings from Revell?
You tease.
Watch this space.
You tease.
Tim.
I'm going to ask you about the marketing and trends now. You've given quite full answers. Traditional aircraft modelers and the new generation. What are the new generation, or how do you target the new generation?
Yeah, so, I think the plastic modelling industry has always been, if you speak to critics, they'll say it's dying because it's filled of 40 to 50 plus year old men. And, they always say, well, they'll die off eventually. But what it is cyclical, really. It goes around in a circle. And the way I imagine it is potentially get into models when you're a kid. You build and build and build, and then you get to your teenage years, find girls, eventually you find booze, you go off to university or whatever you do, you get settled into a job, you don't have enough time, and then when you're 40, 50, generally you've got a bit more time, the kids have left the house, and you try and reconnect or find a hobby that you loved as a kid, and then you can really get into it. I think that's quite a common story when you speak to modelers. There's obviously quite a few people that carry on all the way through, but you'll quite often hear about these big gaps that people have. The problem we have is obviously making sure that we have that sort of first step with kids getting into modelling, because without that, you don't have them returning to the hobby in later life. And so, then the critics or the criticism we have becomes true, that people will die off, that generation will die off, and there's no modelling anymore, and I'm out of a job. It's all about finding ways to get kids interested. Ways you can do that is obviously, the first one is having pocket money style kits. If we go back to our roots, throwing together a Spitfire in a day or a weekend, but it's making it affordable for people to do that. So having lower margin products that you sell in maybe not dedicated model shops. Things like Hobbycraft, yes, it's a model, it has a model section, but you wouldn't say it's a model shop per se. But also places like Tesco, chains that you put it in front of a new audience that way. You obviously want to satisfy the model shops as well and keep them going where we can. But it's about finding as many ways to distribute the product as possible and having the right price point. One thing we've also tried to do is encourage people in where glue might be a bit scary, a traditional model kit. We have click system. So the idea being that you can have a model that, you can build up, clicks together, put the stickers or the decals on, and, it looks great. And then that might encourage you to then make that step into traditional glue model kits, as we know. We sort of invest in that alongside, engagement is another side of it as well, trying to get kids in, doing model shows, but really, we know the general demographic of shows, doing things like giving model kits out to groups where kids are going to be involved is a key thing, because a lot of people don't even know what a model kit is these days, below 18.
Luke, we can testify because between myself in my past and Boulders in his present, both have been with the training corps, trying to introduce the cadets there to what is a model kit, and then working through it and going through instructions. You can clearly see that they've not grown up with the 1970s mindset that me and Tim used to have in building these things. And you have to actually walk them down the path of how to actually use a hairy stick to paint it, and it's one of those, and I'm going to congratulate you now here, Luke, right? I'm going to say to you that at my time in the Air Cadets, you brought out this easy kit tooling for the F4 Phantom, and I think it was a Mitchell bomber, which took it from being your bog standard starter kit to something which was a little bit more intermediate and a bit more tricky, and it really did help the kids progress their skills. So well done on that one.
Thank you. I can't claim the credit, but I'll take it anyway.
Claim it anyway. Claim it anyway.
Yeah, as I was sort of saying, it's that intermediary step that you just mentioned before you then move on to more traditional model kits that are very scary to people, as you sort of just explained there. I think we get a bit blinkered as enthusiasts and think, well, you must know what's in the box, because we do, but a lot of them don't. So, we're trying to also change the packaging in a way that shows more what's inside the box, doing more sort of unboxing videos as well that's linked to from a QR code on the new packaging. Again, as part of this sort of attempt to really explain what the product is to people, which, as I say, a lot of us will be going, well, you don't need to, because we all know what's in it, but it's that audience we're trying to attract. The other way we try and get kids or younger people into the hobby really is by moving to where they are in terms of licensing. So, Revell's always been known for Star Wars, for example. We have Naruto coming out, which is a sort of anime. So it's not just about doing your bog standard Spitfires and your Challenger tanks. It's also trying different things, entertainment licenses specifically, that most of us probably don't often look at as sort of die-hard modelers.
Yeah. While you mentioned that, Luke, it's something I was thinking about is certain trends. Now, you mentioned Star Wars, and you got a big thumbs up from Wongy there.
I love Star Wars.
He's obsessed. He's not seeing Phantom Menace. He's not that obsessed. If you look at a new trend, say a new franchise comes out in a film, do your team look at it and think, yes, we can do something with that? Or do you ever look at it and think, no, there's no way we can make models?
Yeah, so we generally have sort of an R&D meeting once a month, and that will involve me, the other product managers, and obviously our boss and the big boss as well, the CEO, quite often will come down to that meeting, and we'll discuss any of these big topics. If there's a new Star Wars film coming out, if there's any big franchise, will get discussed in some way. Quite often it will be quite a quick discussion. Is there any vehicle in there that we have in the range that we can obviously rebox with this license? No. Okay, right. It's not worth a new tooling, but quite often you'll find stuff that you can reuse products and put them in, this special license. So Stranger Things is a good example. We were lucky enough to have a lot of stuff in the back catalogue that's used in the film. There are obviously some new toolings to go alongside that as well, but let's say new film, the series. And also things like the flying balls, the Red Bull sort of Air Force, let's say. We have a lot of the aircraft that they operate, and we had kits of that. So you can rebox and put new decals and sort of make use of the license that way.
I was going to ask you something about trends as well. I used to work in ladies' fashion many, many years ago. We were always baffled that a lot of things we could sell to one part of the country, we couldn't sell to another part of the country. Some things that were popular in this country were not popular in other countries. I think for the benefit of our listeners overseas as well, are there any things that you would target a specific area, regions, where you would say, no, it just doesn't sell in that region?
Yeah, so there are definitely, if we talk traditional model kits, we sort of know that some aircraft will do better in the UK and Australia than they will in Europe and vice versa. But when it comes to trends like we were just talking about with Stranger Things, Star Wars, quite often you'll get the license to distribute in Europe but you won't get it for Asia, So I think going back to Wongy's big thumbs up for the Star Wars stuff, Bandai have the model kit license for Star Wars in Asia, or at least in Japan, I believe. But we have it for Europe. So hence why we rebox the Bandai kits for some of the Star Wars things, because we have the license for model kit manufacture of Star Wars items. So quite often you're limited to certain areas, especially when it's an entertainment license. They won't just do worldwide rights generally. You might be lucky and get them, but quite often it's sort of split into different regions. But when it comes to traditional kits, certain subjects will do better elsewhere. We try and encourage sales where we think they might be a bit weaker. For example, Gannet just brought out the 7-second fairy Gannet, and there were 4 operators of that. There was the Indonesians, the British, obviously, the Australians, and the Germans. Well, the British and the Germans, there are 2 main markets, so they're going in. The Australians, or Australia, is a growing market for us. So, yeah, why don't we put that in? Indonesia, are we going to break the Indonesian market with our 7-second fairy Gannet? No, probably not. So we left that one out. But if we felt there was an opportunity to encourage sales by including a different marking option, or a different thing we could do with the kit or the packaging, then we would look to do that, as long as it obviously didn't sacrifice the other sales. Another option that comes to mind is the F-35 we've just done. We obviously had the standard release. The sales team were knocking on my door saying, well, the Norwegians have them, the Australians have them. For the F-35 specifically, we did a country-specific version for certain distributors in other countries, because they might have sold 10 of the original kit, but they'll sell 500 of the one with their country's markings, because it's easier for them to sell. So, we do talk to the sales teams. We do talk as a company to try and make the most of any sales opportunities we have. Marking options are a good way to do that, but also obviously promotions and marketing. But that's not my bag, so we won't talk about that.
Okay, a question I've got on reference your different markets. Obviously, with the issue these days of paints and transporting of chemicals, etc., have you thought about updating your instruction sheets to actually not just include Revell paints available in the individual marketplace? So for Australia, SMS paint and the likes of other manufacturers with options for acrylic and lacquers compared to enamel.
I'll let you try and convince my bosses to recommend other companies' paints. But
we'll write in, Luke. We'll write in.
Well, when you look at what Qatar is actually offering there, I think there's about 5 or 6 different paint manufacturers, paint reference numbers, reference against the colours they actually needed or call out for the actual kit.
Yeah, so I'd say one of the key differences there is that obviously Qatar don't manufacture their own paints. It's slightly different, obviously, because we do, but to mitigate that, because I'm not a big fan of flicking back and forth trying to work out what paint colour code letter it is. What we're starting to do, especially with sort of RAF aircraft or modern jets, is putting the equivalent colour. So what I mean by that is not the Tamiya reference, not the SMS, is if there's an FS code, if there's an RAF colour, so RAF sky, dark green, giving the actual reference used on the real aircraft. Because then you can, if you so wish, obviously go and find a different paint. But it also makes it easier when you look at the paint guides at the back of the instruction booklet. You're not having to flick back and forth to work out what letter A, B, C refers to. You've got the reference there, and it makes it a lot easier. So that's the middle ground that we've started to introduce. I think most people will appreciate we're not going to recommend other companies' paints, but by giving the actual reference, we found a happy medium.
Fantastic. Okay, Nevs.
It's obviously really good to have you on, Luke, bringing that youthful vanguard of the modelling generation. So the questions I've got for you, Luke, are very thematically based, thinking, obviously you'll have touched on a lot of this already, thinking about innovation and feedback from the modelling community. So how much influence does that feedback from the modellers, from our community, have on any future kit decisions made at Revell? So an example I'd use is, recently there was the Blue Diamonds versus Black Arrows scheme for the Hunter T-Bird. Do you think reaching out via mediums like podcasts such as ours, interacting with the customer base, is that going to help with any future product decisions that you make?
Yeah, massively so. I think we have to rely on the community, especially for things like the Hunter that are really enthusiast products. It can't hurt to engage people. And, at the end of the day, we're more likely to sell them if people feel invested in the product and we've been transparent as a company and they can see where we're going with it and sort of the ambitions of the brand. Engaging with podcasts such as this one and other YouTube channels, all good publicity. Any publicity is good publicity, but, it's good to get the Revell name out there and show more of what we're doing, because I think most people would agree that Revell within the enthusiast market had sort of fallen back a bit, and people maybe weren't so aware of releases that were coming out. So to make it more of an event when we announce a new product. And how do we do that? We do it on podcasts such as this and try and put a bit of a personality to the brand. Unfortunately for this one, you're stuck with mine, but it's a case of engaging with fans for the better. And in terms of how does it affect future kit decisions, if we not talking marketing decisions, but actual subject choices, what do we develop new next year, the year after? It's a huge input. We always joke, people will come up at Telford and say, oh, you should do this one-off prototype. It only ever flew. Well, it never flew and there's no photos of it, but you should do it. And me and my mates would buy it. And that's an extreme example, of course. And you sort of laugh it off and go, yeah, sure, mate. But for every one of those, there's another good suggestion that comes in. And it might not even be a whole new tool. It might make you look at a product that you had forgotten about in the catalogue. Our catalogue's so vast that you can quite often forget, oh yeah, we do have that in the tool bag, or that's an interesting idea for the Matchbox items we own, and stuff like that. It can really give a spark that obviously then we go back into our little hobbit hole in Germany and try and develop into a product that people are going to buy. But I think people do underestimate the value of community and the suggestions we get. It is such a huge part of my job is listening to modelers. Obviously, I have to put on the sensible hat and take stuff with a pinch of salt quite often, but everything that we do has at least been suggested once. That's through the benefit of being suggested about 20 different things every day. But, we've never done a product that no one's ever mentioned. So quite often you'll bring out a product, and I've had this here and at the other brand, that people go, oh, you did that because I told you. Well, yeah, sort of, but it was also in development 2 years before you mentioned it.
Yeah. I mean, from one sort of young modeler to another, Luke, I'm going to go out on a limb here and saying there's actually a lot to be said for a Reebok. Yes, a new tool we always want, but actually, how often are some of the best model kits those that were tooled 20 or 30 years ago? One of the examples, I think, with Revell, the two Spitfire Mark V kits in 72nd scale, they were tooled at quite similar times, and Matt's Modelling Minutes did a bit of a video on YouTube unboxing both to compare the toolings, but just bringing those out, and whether it's updating the colour schemes or even bringing colour schemes that haven't been seen for a while back. In the Spitfire, there's one of the ones I've built from Revell. There's actually a Danish version that flew with the RAF. It's absolutely fascinating to see. So I think, there is a lot to be said there for letting the vanguard of modelers today have the same experiences that modelers would have had in the 90s and early 2000s.
Definitely. In terms of reboxing, people sometimes lose interest because, yes, it's been out there before. But as I was saying earlier, we have such a vast back catalogue. When we get rid of something out of the range, it's a long time before we then revisit it. So in the case of stuff this year, if you think of the 32nd, the Rado 196 that's coming back, that got released in 2010, I believe, in the double float military version. And then a couple of years later, it was the single float B version. And then we didn't see it at all. And Wongy's shaking his hand there with the single float version. It wasn't as popular as the military one. And that's pretty common. It's just a second version we could get out of the tooling. But that original release was released in 2010. it would have been superseded by the single float version a couple of years later. And they were going for stupid money on eBay. And this might sound really silly, but that's a good way of telling whether we should re-release a kit. If they're going for crazy money,
Definitely.
it's time to, there's obviously demand there. Unfortunately, Muggins here has to buy a couple kits to develop the re-release. So I was out of pocket massively. But for those lucky few on eBay who had a buyer a few months ago, well done, because the price of the kit dropped massively after we obviously announced we were bringing it out at about 40 or 50 euro. I can't remember what it is, but
Yeah.
So a Reebox can be huge. If you pick the right subject. There's a really rich vein of Revell kits from the late 90s and from the early 2010s, and there were some really golden kits around there. If you think 7-second Tornado, the best in its class, that was 1997.
Fantastic kit, though.
Yeah, there's quite a few from that era. Same with the 2010s. You've got the Irado, the FW200 Condor, things like that have never been superseded because they're quite unique. Maybe not so much the Tornado, but that we did really, really well, and they were sort of golden eras for Revell, so why not bring them back? So that's the joy of picking my 2025 releases, and obviously now into 2026. So it feels weird to be saying, obviously we're only in June, but I've been thinking of 26 since last year. So I never know what year it is. There's so many good re-releases we can do, because we obviously have such a huge back catalogue as Revell, but also we own the Matchbox toolings and other sort of toolings we've acquired along the way. So we're never short of ideas when it comes to re-releases, and colour schemes are always a joy to pick. It's one of my favourite bits of the job, is finding schemes that I can put onto aircraft. Obviously you have to do the famous ones, but you can also put in an oddball scheme every now and then. A captured scheme. I think we've just put one on the BV222 that came out earlier this year. Trying to make it a bit more varied, so not just repeating the original schemes. Again, to make it interesting for modelers, but also get more sales, I hate to say.
There's nothing wrong with that.
What you said regarding the re-releases and obviously the price of model kits, the major one at the minute is the Puma. The old Matchbox 30-second Puma. Because the Puma retired this year, everybody wants to build it in the last scheme.
Well, all I can say is I am aware of it, Mike.
You're such a tease, Luke. You are really such a tease.
And speaking of Matchbox, the 132nd Lysander, which seems to be very a hot topic at the moment, nice target tug stripy scheme would go down rather well.
Very much so.
Well, considering they've got all the 30-second Matchbox toolings, they've got the Dauntless, because I've got the Dauntless. I've got the Lysander.
You've got the Venom, hasn't you?
I've got about 20 Venoms.
Well, there you go. Luke can sell them.
Yeah, we don't need to reproduce it. I'll just buy them off you.
And the other one as well, Luke, I don't know if you've got the tooling for these, is the HE111s in 30-second.
Yes, we do have the tooling. Are you saying Matchbox, or we have the Revell ones that were done?
No, I'm on about the Revell ones, because I've got two P1s. There's one just behind me here, and there's one in the loft. And the amount of money they are going for on eBay is pushing over the £200 mark.
I know, yeah. I was bidding on one because I want to build one, although I don't know where I'm going to build it because my desk isn't that big. And I think it was a Veteranus on Facebook where I was bidding, and I put £110, and I missed a trick because the next person bid 111, and I thought, fair enough, Heinkel 111. They've bid 111. Yeah, I'm not going to outbid you. I think they won in the end. But yeah, they are going for stupid prices. There's so many of those kits that just go for silly prices. And it's not the only reason we'll re-release something, but it's a good indicator. It's one of those that you sort of look at and it does make you think. So you go and look at the tooling, see what you think.
The H6 is the rarer one out of the two. You can seem to pick the P1s up, but the H6, which I think has got the torpedoes underneath, they're like, you've got more chance of finding
Lord Lucan.
Yeah. What's a goal at the end of the rainbow? Yeah. Absolutely. To that rare.
Another thing is, with those kits that are going for silly money, big 30-second things, you can't bring them all out next year because obviously modelers only have so much in the budget. So You have to plan this.
That's what they tell their other halves, Luke. That's what they tell their other halves.
Raffle win. It was a raffle win.
Yeah.
I want it for a tenner.
Well, when we do range planning, I mean, it's a bit boring, but you obviously have to spread those sort of price point items out a bit, because if you bring them all out, if you bring, say, 6 30-second scale aircraft that are all £60 plus out in the same year, or very close together, you're not going to sell as many as if you spread them out, because people only have finite money, unfortunately, but so you do have to be a bit sensible when it comes to product releases. Yes, there might be a huge demand now. That demand's not going to go away, because it's not like someone's going to bring one out to undercut you because we're the only ones with the tooling. We'll treat them like diamonds and restrict the supply.
Absolutely, like I said, because you've done some pearlers, like the Unified Typhoon's another one that goes for ridiculous money, especially on eBay, especially the single-seater, because that's the one everybody wants. But it's not the best one out the two, because the twin-seater is the one to have, because it comes with all the weapons that you don't get in the single-seater. Okay. Like the Storm Shadows and the extra Meteors and the AMRAAMs, they're all on the twin-seater, not the single-seater.
So what I was saying earlier about if we bring back a kit, someone will say, I suggested that. It must have been me that... is the reason you've brought it back. You'll be saying that in a few years when it appears. You'll go, yeah, that was me.
Yeah, but at least it's recorded.
So I did have a second one, obviously my fault for throwing a curveball in there. Here are episode 2 of the podcast, and I talk quite a lot about the advent of 3D printing. So I've been using it and defending my position against Chairman Wong when it comes to full hull ship kits. Over the last couple of years, 3D printing and digital tooling, it's really evolving, and you're seeing a lot of manufacturers now incorporating, whether it's 3D components, masks, photo etch, even 3D appropriate decals, particularly for in the cockpits. Is Revell going to be incorporating any of this sort of technology into its production processes and designs in the future?
It's definitely something we've got our eye on. So, as you say, there's so many different facets that can take. When it comes to 3D printing, we've been using that for a very long time for development of designs. Our CAD designers will quite often print off a sub-assembly partway through the design just to check whether it works. Are they going mad? Will that actually assemble? Sanity checks, they call them, just to make sure the thing they're designing works in real life. Because what can be quite difficult when you're a CAD designer is you can zoom in infinitely. So you think this item is huge and is going to work perfectly. You print it off and you soon realize it's just not viable to put that onto a frame and expect people to assemble it at the end of the day. So, 3D printing in terms of prototype has been used for a very long time. It's only ever getting better for it. And some of the builds you'll see on boxes have started to use 3D printed parts. When I've lost a frame somewhere, I'll just send the 3D data to someone, print it out, and no one's the wiser. When it comes to involving 3D printing in kits, at the moment, we've not done anything. So people like Armour, obviously Edward, they do extras. I think Armour have released a kit that relies on some of these 3D printed conversion parts, essentially, for like a photo reconnaissance version. Can't remember of what kit. The problem is obviously scale. Injection molding is perfect for scale manufacturing. And, you can produce 10,000, 20,000, a million units. 3D printing is obviously a lot more expensive per part. When you're talking about those sorts of numbers, but it does allow you to sort of add to a mold. If we go back to the question about altering the grip and its dimensions, not quite as extreme, but for this Meteor, say I want to add another part, I'm not going to send the tooling all the way back to China. I could come up with some product where we put a small 3D printed part in the box to make a PR10 version, like a conversion parts. Paul's eyes just lit up there. I'm not saying it's happening, but small changes, things that we could to bring a new version to market. It's a possibility, but it's still, I hate to say, it's still in its infancy. It seems to have been in its infancy for a very long time. It is definitely maturing, and it is a lot further on than it was 10 years ago. But there are all sorts of problems, and it's as with any new technology, It's constantly changing and being refined. I think watch this space. I think in the next couple of years, you'll see 3D printed parts appear in some limited capacity, would be my sort of thought on it. At the moment, there's nothing solid in the works. One thing we are doing, though, and this is the beauty of sort of the 3D printer revolution, is where we can, we're looking to start adding little extra CAD files that you can download from the Revell website that you can then print. So, for example, our 737 tooling, the 144 scale one, the winglets on the 800 version are slightly the wrong profile, something we're aware of, but changing the mold just isn't practical. So what we can do, though, for those that are really, really interested in doing it, is offer the revised shaped parts as a file. And if you're that way inclined, you can go and print it off. And what we're hoping to do is start offering stuff like that and giving a list of suppliers that we recommend. You know, there's plenty of people who will print it off for you at a cost, obviously. We don't want to get into the 3D part supply game. We just want to give that option to people. And so, you know, things like the Meteor, I think the intakes, we've had to slightly compromise one of the small vents on one side just because of the draft. If we were able to then give you the files to print it off, if you really want to have a corrected set without having to go and buy, you know, an Edward version, then we can, because it's of no cost to us in terms of design time. It's something that's already been designed. So that's one thing we're starting to look to do. And that's really a community engagement thing. It's a case of what can we offer as little extras that make Revell better as a company, shows that we're sort of thinking of the enthusiast.
I think that's a great idea, Luke. As a suggestion, if you put a QR code in the instructions where if you wanted to open up certain panels, etc., that you've got a printable detail that once you've chopped out the old plastic, you can print out a new 3D element to it and show off the detail of certain electronics, etc.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty limitless with what we can do. The thing that limits us is obviously time and resource from a Revell side, having the freelancer or in-house designer create that stuff. But where we can, it's a nice thing to add. And that's where we really look at incorporating 3D files, 3D printing into our sort of workflow at the moment. When it comes to sort of including 3D printed parts, I think generally you're more likely to see them in our platinum editions, our special edition sort of boxings in the future. I think it's a while until 3D printed kits as a whole are fully mature. You know, the last 2 years, I think they've massively improved. I can't remember who's doing it. Is it Luke Graf that are doing a Grumman Duck at the moment as a whole kit?
Yes.
And then Airscale were doing the Defiant.
Yep.
What you'll see is obviously they're a lot more expensive generally, just because it's not designed for mass manufacture, unless you've got a 3D printing farm. But even then, it's difficult because of all the print failures you'll get. Injection molding is a proven technology. That being said, you know that you'll see more of these 3D printed kits coming onto the market, and that's a good thing. I mean, for cottage industry, you'll see a lot more of them as well, because the barrier to entry has always been the cost of tooling. If you think tool is likely to be $100,000 or thereabouts for something like a Meteor, $120,000 or around there, a print is, you know, the cost of the material and the printer.
I know we talked about Meteor, but can you tease any upcoming aircraft or helicopters or even space kits which are in development, not giving too much away to the opposition, obviously, which might get me all excited and maybe even Tim?
I've been dreading this question because there's not much I can give away, really, but I mean, what can I say? That's a good question.
It's got 4 rotor blades, that'll do.
Right, I'm going to have to remind myself we're recording quite late at night, so my brain has now officially returned to mush. What have I got coming out next year? Good thing I'm not sharing my screen because I'm just checking my schedule now.
That would be quite funny.
Yeah.
So he's mentioned Lincoln. He's mentioned,
Yeah. So there'll be a good few re-releases that will make people happy, I'm sure. I mean, the one spoiler I can give away, not so much for next year, but for this year, is on the Meteor, because we've mentioned it a few times. One thing we haven't announced yet is what will be included because it's a first edition. So the idea is it's got lots of extras in. And so I can tell you what we've got in the box there, or what we're hoping to do is have a reference guide within it, a mask set poster of an original advertisement for a Gloster Meteor taken from the 1950s. Trying to remember obviously the FR9 parts, because there's no guarantee that the FR9 parts will be in the next release, if there is one. Not that I'm allowed to confirm or deny anything to keep it sufficiently vague. But next year, we were talking about Revell has sort of done one new tool a year for the past 5 when it comes to aircraft. We'll definitely be beating that. We'll be at least 3 new toolings again, hopefully 4, and they're all aircraft related. I'm really trying to keep it as vague as possible. I can't give you much.
I presume they're in 70-second scale, Luke.
Every one of our new tools will be in a different scale, I believe, is a true statement.
That's good.
Yes. There you go. To keep it sufficiently vague, but also give you something.
Okay, Luke, for on the bench down in Australia, can you actually give us a quick summary of what the Australian options are in the box for the Meteor?
Yep. So in terms of the scheme, we will do what I believe is sort of the most famous of the Korean War, Hailstorm, as the scheme item, which will obviously feature the ADF fairing that goes on the back of the spine for the Meteor, and obviously includes rockets to make it sufficiently Korean War enough to carry those markings. And that's it in terms of Australia. What we've tried to do with the markings, I think by the time this is released, the markings will have all been announced, is have a varied set. So the idea being, as we were sort of discussing earlier, that we maximise sales in places like Australia by including schemes. We'll have a Belgian scheme, so we got to keep the Europeans happy, being a European company ourselves. Obviously, a couple of RAF as well, including an FR9 scheme. One nice little addition, not Australian specific, sorry, but a little addition we added right near the end was the air-to-air refueling probe that I'm guessing most people didn't know the Meteor had. I think it was 245 Squadron. Paul, you might correct me if I'm wrong on that one. They trialled air-to-air refueling with a B-29. It's not the official designation at that point. I can't remember what it would be called.
KB-50.
There we go. Thank you. So, we've included that and the relevant scheme to go with. But yeah, in terms of Australian scheme, we've only included one at this time, but it's obviously worth saying it comes with the relevant parts to make Hailstorm, which I believe is the early canopy. And we've also got the other bits such as small, large intakes, early ailerons plus late ailerons, etc., etc. And so whatever sort of Meteor you want to build, F8 wise, you can build it from the kit. So that's the good news.
Okay, does it include the difference for your, so obviously alluded the both types of canopy are included in the box. The Meteor had 2 different types of canopy rail, really getting down to the nuts and bolts. Is the likelihood of that is going to be an aftermarket part?
No, we have both rails. You full well knew, Paul, it had that because you spotted it on the CAD. So, yes, it does have both rails. Unfortunately, at first, our CAD designer had forgot that both rails were needed. And thankfully, due to yourself, we were able to rectify that before it entered tooling. So, yeah, I'm pretty confident you can say it's the most comprehensive Meteor kit to ever be made. We're past 400 parts in the tooling, so pretty dense in terms of part count. Not helped by the fact there are 48 parts in each engine. That'll do it.
I know. I'm breathing.
One you like 60 parts or less?
Well, in fact, on the date of recording, I've just had pictures of the frames come through. I had one yesterday come through of the engine, but today we had the first 2 full tool pictures come through of plastic, and it's looking good. A few issues that are to be expected in test shot 1, but very, very exciting to see the physical product of the tooling.
Oh, you tease, Luke, you tease.
It doesn't help the fact that he's actually already sent me a couple of the sprue shots already.
Now I'm even more angry.
Well, I think the first time the tooling the shot should go on show is Avon. So that's the 3rd of August, I believe. We should have 2 built models as well, being built by a top secret team. Unfortunately, no one on the podcast. Sorry, guys.
Noted.
They'll be delivered
Insulted.
to Avon. It's my birthday that weekend, so that's an appropriate present. I'm going to be over the moon when I see them for the first time.
Well, as long as they turn up, unlike the show in Germany.
Oh, don't remind me. Yeah, for anyone that didn't know, you might have seen a 3D printed prototype appear. But what had happened was I took some photos. James, who had created it, worked through the night. I think he completed it in 48 hours was the deadline. I drove to Swindon to pick it up. Took a photo on the desk to show Paul. Thank God I did, because it got packed away in a box to be sent to Nuremberg Toy Fair. Never made it. About a month later, it appeared in about 400 separate pieces, none of which resembled the ones that would appear on the frame if you wear a proper kit. The courier decided to play football with it, we believe. Such a shame, but at least I took a photo to prove it existed.
You see the things I've done for this kit release. Anyway, Luke, thank you very much for your time. I think we've just about exhausted you out, and obviously, as you said, it is late in the evening that we're recording this, so thank you for actually staying up beyond your bedtime for actually doing this for us. Hopefully, you're going to keep us updated in the future on releases from Revell and having discussions of where you don't actually tell us anything, but actually allude to the whole product line for the following year as well at the same time. Luke, thank you very much for your time, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks very much, Luke.
Cheers. If you fancy joining the madness, we're just a click away. On Facebook, we're Beyond the Box Art. On Instagram, at Beyond the Box Art Pod, where you can find the up-to-date news from manufacturers and suppliers, ask questions, share disasters, or just lurk and silently judge. We salute all types. Oh, and commercial sponsors? Yes, you. If you've got a product or a service or something that might appeal to modelers who spend more time with plastic than people, get in touch. Drop us an email at info@beyondtheboxart.com or ping us on the socials. We're open to ideas, collaborations, and even the occasional bribe. For the full experience, episodes, the background on the team, etc., it's all at www.beyondtheboxart.com. And if you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep the lights on, the glue flowing, and the caffeine stocked, head over to patreon.com/beyondtheboxart. Even the price of a pot of Tamiya paint makes a difference. And no, we won't spend it on decal softener. Probably. If you want to just drop us a line, give us ideas, feedback, or just tell us your cat sat on your half-built Lancaster, email us at info@beyondtheboxart.com. Well, everyone, another marathon episode, and I think grateful for what Luke has told us and the bits that he hasn't told us and the bits he told us afterwards that we're not allowed to go and talk about as well. But from me, thank you very much for listening.
Well, thanks everyone for turning up and downloading us again. We're going to be bigger, better, and even more clearer to you. So take care. Happy modelling.
Thanks very much for listening, all. Just remember, super glue when used. Always be cautious, because you can stick everything to your fingers. And happy modelling.
Yep, signing off, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing a full hull ship model.
Well, see you again. Well done. Thanks for listening in.
And from myself, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next episode when we will have Paul Regan, President of IPMS UK, as a guest. Speak to you next time. Bye-bye.